the Supreme Leader Khamenei is dead.
Tonight, Iran's Supreme Leader is believed to be dead after joint attacks on the country early this morning.
Oh my God, it has finally occurred. Maybe this is it. This is our chance now.
You call him a monster. What do you mean?
To the great, proud people of Iran, I say tonight that the hour of your freedom is at hand.
On Sunday, March 1st, 2026, members of the Islamic Movement in Nigeria took to the streets in Niger State, protesting the reported killing of Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. Everything started on Saturday, February 28, when the United States and Israel launched coordinated airstrikes on Tehran, hitting over 500 targets with more than 200 warplanes in what they called Operation Epic Fury. One of those strikes hit the compound of Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, Iran's supreme leader for 36 years, while he was in his office. The attack killed him instantly, along with his daughter, son-in-law, grandchild, daughter-in-law, and at least 7 senior Iranian defense officials who were meeting with him at the time. Iranian state media initially denied it, claiming Khamenei had been moved to a secure location, but on Sunday morning, they confirmed what Israeli and US officials had been saying for hours. The man who ruled Iran since 1989 was dead. The reaction inside Iran was immediate but split completely down the middle. In cities like Tehran, Mashhad, and Qom, tens of thousands poured into the streets mourning, crying, and holding portraits of Khamenei. State television showed endless footage of grieving crowds near the Imam Reza shrine, with people wailing and beating their chests in traditional Shiite mourning rituals. Iran declared 40 days of national mourning and a 7-day public holiday to honor his memory. But in other Iranian cities, people celebrated in the streets instead of mourning. Videos verified by multiple sources showed crowds cheering, playing music, setting off fireworks, and in at least one case toppling a statue of Khamenei, while people cheered loudly. This was a country divided, mourning and celebrating the same death simultaneously depending on which city you were in. Outside Iran, the geopolitical shockwave moved incredibly fast. In Baghdad, protesters tried to storm the US embassy near the Green Zone. In Karachi, Pakistan, riots erupted at the US consulate, where Marine security guards opened fire, killing at least 22 protesters and wounding over 120 people. Hamas mourned Khamenei as a supporter who provided political, diplomatic, and military backing to their cause. Hezbollah's Secretary General vowed retaliation against those responsible. Palestinian Islamic Jihad called it a war crime and a treacherous attack. Iraq's most senior Shia cleric, Grand Ayatollah Ali Sistani, issued a statement mourning Khamenei and urging Iranians to maintain unity during this crisis. Iran-backed militias across Iraq declared they would defend the Islamic Republic and attack US bases in response. But here's where most coverage stopped paying attention. And here's what makes the story more complicated than just Middle Eastern fury over a Middle Eastern crisis. While Baghdad and Karachi were burning, protests erupted in Nigeria, thousands of miles away in West Africa, where the vast majority of the population is Sunni Muslim and has no direct stake in Iranian power struggles. On Sunday, March 1st, members of the Islamic Movement in Nigeria took to the streets in Niger State, chanting solidarity slogans, waving Iranian flags, and carrying placards reading Sonorate, "We stand with Iran." They called Khamenei's killing an act of global injustice and imperial aggression that needed to be condemned. Videos verified by Nigerian media showed dozens of protesters marching less than 24 hours after Khamenei's death was confirmed, which raises an obvious question. Why were Nigerians protesting the death of an Iranian cleric in the first place? The answer is that there's a network connecting them, one that's been built over decades but operates mostly out of sight until moments like this reveal just how far its reach extends. The Islamic Movement in Nigeria, known as IMN, has aligned itself ideologically with Iran since the early 1980s, when its founder, Sheikh Ibrahim el-Zakzaki, became completely enamored with Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini's vision of Islamic governance during Iran's 1979 revolution. What started as a Sunni student movement transformed into a Shiite organization that modeled itself entirely on Iranian revolutionary ideology. El-Zakzaki has met with Khamenei multiple times over the years, most recently on October 14, 2024, during a trip to Iran. In April 2025, el-Zakzaki publicly stated that Iran's missile attack on Israel brought tears of joy to his eyes, showing just how tightly aligned IMN ideology is with Tehran's foreign policy objectives. This is not just casual religious admiration or distant respect for a foreign leader. This is an institutional alliance built through decades of religious education, funding, ideological training, and direct coordination between Iranian authorities and Nigerian Shiite leaders. Iran does not need embassies or diplomatic missions to project influence when it has movements, like the IMN, that view Tehran as the center of Shiite resistance against Western power and domination. And when Khamenei died, that network activated immediately without needing any formal instructions or coordination. The speed of the Nigerian protests, happening less than 24 hours after confirmation of his death, demonstrates coordination and loyalty that most governments cannot inspire even in their own citizens who live under their direct authority. But the relationship between the IMN and the Nigerian government is violent and unresolved, which is why these protests carry extra tension beyond just mourning a foreign leader who died far away. In December 2015, Nigerian army soldiers attacked IMN facilities in the city of Zaria, killing between 348 and 1,000 people depending on whose count you believe and whose version of events you trust. The military claimed IMN members had blocked a convoy and tried to assassinate Nigeria's chief of army staff, which would justify the military response. The IMN says they were conducting a peaceful religious procession when soldiers opened fire without any provocation whatsoever. What is completely undisputed by both sides is that hundreds of people died, including 3 of El-Zakzaki's sons, and El-Zakzaki himself was arrested during the crackdown. He has been in detention since 2015, despite a 2016 court order explicitly demanding his release, which the government has simply ignored for nearly a decade. Since then, every single time the IMN organizes public demonstrations demanding El-Zakzaki's release or expressing political positions, violence erupts between protesters and security forces. In July 2019, clashes in Abuja killed 11 protesters, 1 journalist, and 1 police officer in what became one of the deadliest confrontations. The Nigerian government responded by banning the IMN entirely, declaring it a terrorist organization and making membership or participation in its activities illegal. In March 2025, during a Quds Day demonstration supporting Palestinians in Gaza, clashes between IMN members and Nigerian troops left 12 people dead, including 5 IMN members and 1 soldier, with 19 others arrested and charged. So when IMN protesters took to the streets on March 1st mourning Khamenei and chanting anti-American slogans, Nigerian authorities were watching nervously, knowing from years of experience that these demonstrations can spiral into deadly confrontations very quickly. Now here's the question that gets to the heart of why this matters beyond just Nigeria's internal security problems. How many other places across Africa have similar networks waiting to activate when Tehran needs them? Nigeria's Islamic Movement represents the largest organized Shiite presence in sub-Saharan Africa, but they are definitely not the only one operating on the continent. Iran has spent decades cultivating religious and ideological ties in African countries with significant Muslim populations, funding religious schools, supporting cultural institutions, and building loyalty through education and ideology rather than through formal state relationships or economic investment. These networks operate below the level of international headlines and diplomatic reporting, but when Tehran needs them to mobilize, they can put protesters in the streets of cities thousands of miles from Iran within hours of receiving the call. And that reveals something really uncomfortable about global power dynamics that most analysis completely misses or deliberately ignores. We spend so much time talking about Chinese infrastructure investment in Africa, about Western aid programs and development assistance, and about competition for influence through economic deals and diplomatic relationships. But Iran has built a completely different kind of influence, one that's based on ideology, identity, and religious solidarity rather than money or formal treaties. It just requires cultivating communities that see Iran as the defender of their religious identity and their resistance against what they perceive as Western domination of the Muslim world. When those communities mobilize in response to Khamenei's death by taking to the streets and waving Iranian flags, it demonstrates that Iran's reach extends far beyond the Middle East into regions where most people assume Iranian influence does not exist or does not matter. The timing makes this even more significant because Iran is now facing its biggest succession crisis in 36 years, with no clear path forward and enormous external pressure. Khamenei ruled with near-absolute authority for over 3 decades, controlling the military, the judiciary, state media, and all major strategic decisions without much oversight or challenge. His death leaves a massive power vacuum at the center of Iranian government. Under Iran's constitution, an interim council now holds power, while the Assembly of Experts, which is a body of 88 Islamic clerics, selects a new supreme leader to replace him. But the US-Israeli strikes did not just kill Khamenei and leave everything else intact. They also killed or targeted dozens of senior officials who would normally be candidates for succession, deliberately decapitating Iran's leadership structure. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps has already launched retaliatory strikes on 27 bases, hosting US troops and Israeli military facilities across the region. President Trump warned Iran it would face force never seen before if it retaliated further, escalating tensions even more. This is a country in crisis, actively at war, and completely leaderless at the worst possible moment. For movements like Nigeria's IMN, this creates enormous uncertainty about who they will be looking to for guidance and support going forward. If Iran's new leadership, whoever that ends up being, decides to pull back from supporting foreign Shiite movements because they need to focus all resources on internal stability and the ongoing war with Israel and the United States, groups like the IMN could find themselves suddenly isolated without the external funding and ideological support that has sustained them for decades. Or alternatively, if the Revolutionary Guard seizes more overt control of the Iranian government, which many analysts expect will happen, Iran might actually double down on supporting proxy movements as a way to project strength and maintain regional influence despite the military defeats it has suffered. Either way, the Nigerian protests are a signal that these networks still function, that they still respond immediately when Tehran calls, and that African governments now have to manage religious and political movements whose primary loyalty is not to any African state or national government, but to an ideological center located thousands of miles away in a completely different region. So here's what the protests in Nigeria actually reveal when you look beyond the surface-level reporting. They show that a Middle Eastern conflict can trigger immediate mobilization in West African cities within hours. They show that Iran has built influence networks across Africa that operate independently of formal diplomacy, economic relationships, or state-to-state agreements. They show that religious ideology can create loyalties that are stronger than national borders, geographic distance, or practical self-interest. And they show that when global powers clash in places like Tehran and Tel Aviv, the ripple effects land in places nobody is paying attention to until protesters suddenly show up waving flags for a country most of them have never visited, mourning a leader most of them never met, simply because decades ago, someone decided that Iran represented their vision of resistance against a world order they see as fundamentally oppressive and unjust. The real question moving forward is not why Nigerians protested Khamenei's death, because that part actually makes sense once you understand the history and the ideological connections that bind these movements together. The real question is how many other places across Africa and beyond have similar networks that we only notice when they activate publicly, and what happens when those networks start operating without strong Iranian leadership to coordinate and direct them. Because if Iran descends into prolonged internal instability, or even civil conflict following Khamenei's death, movements like the IMN do not just disappear or dissolve peacefully. They adapt to new circumstances, they find new patrons who can provide support, or they radicalize further and become more extreme in their tactics and demands. And that creates serious security challenges for African governments that are already struggling with extremism, religious tension, and foreign interference from multiple competing powers. The protests in Nigeria are not just about mourning one man's death. They are about a much larger story of how power actually works when it operates through belief and ideology, instead of through money or weapons. And that story is just beginning to unfold across Africa and the wider world.